churches are now front and center in the debate over reopening during the COVID-19 pandemic. For a perspective on how local churches are being prayerfully guided in making difficult decisions, I spoke with Reverend Myron McCoy, Senior Pastor of First United Methodist Church at the Chicago Temple, Reverend Shannon Kershner, Senior Pastor at Fourth Presbyterian Church of Chicago, and Reverend Elizabeth Aguilar, Pastor of Community Congregational United Church of Christ of Chula, Vista, California. Reverend McCoy, why don't I start with you and tell us, how has the First United Methodist Church in Chicago dealt with the pandemic, and how are you still offering worship?
Well, we had to immediately go into motion in trying to get services started. Interestingly, we had been doing FaceTime Live for our worship bringing services, but with the governor's stay at home and limiting the number of persons, we opted earlier in that week to implement services through a GoToMeeting. So we do services GoToMeeting live with persons. We do that 3 times during the course of the weekend, and then we record and also add in other music to make a more fuller service for YouTube offering.
And Reverend Kershner, how about Fourth Presbyterian Church of Chicago? How have you dealt with the pandemic and offering worship?
Yeah, so it felt like the Tuesday before the stay-at-home order was issued, it felt like on that Tuesday, the biggest decision we were making was like not serving cookies at coffee hour, you know, that was what we were gonna have to do. And then just maybe that was the week prior, but the reality of what was actually going on set in pretty quickly. And so when they said that you really can't leave your home, we made the quick decision to start streaming from my living room, which is the manse of Fourth Church. And the first set, we had been live streaming. We have a Ustream channel, so we had been doing that, luckily, since Advent, trying to get better about that and to learn the technology in a more fulsome way, thank goodness. So we then downloaded the software to my laptop. And so that first Sunday was rough because it was me singing everything a cappella and doing all of the work parts of the service by myself, and then eventually recruiting a couple of my family members to serve as liturgists. Over time, we have we still live stream it at 11 every Sunday. We're just doing one service. I'm impressed with your 3, Myron. And so I'm exhausted after one. And so we're recording, we're also recording it so that people can watch it later. We found that we get as many people who view worship after the service as we do who are tuning in during the service itself. But I sort of curate it. We have pre-recorded music, and other of my clergy colleagues record some prayers and different pieces of the liturgy, and we download all that to my laptop always on Saturday around 4 o'clock. We have a rehearsal at 5 where I make sure I know how to push the buttons when. And then we go live every Sunday. So it is very interesting. And I've quickly learned how to preach to the top of my laptop.
Right. It was a huge learning curve for many churches.
Huge.
Absolutely.
Huge. So at least this way, though, people can still sing because they're in their home. So I know we'll get to the challenges in a little bit, but that's one thing that that this live streaming worship into people's homes still allows for, is that kind of singing and participation.
Right. So Reverend Aguilar, how about Community Congregational United Church of Christ? How have you adapted?
So we are located in Chula Vista, California. It's 7 miles north of Tijuana, Mexico, and about 9 miles south of San Diego. So my congregation is very mixed, diverse in age and racial, ethnically as well, but the largest percentage of people are older, and I would say older than 60 years old. So technology, it has been a big learning curve for everyone. And I really congratulate my congregation for going along with me, so to speak, on this ride. So we also, the other thing is that I've been here a year and a half. So I'm the senior pastor, but this is a new call for me. And we had not gotten to the point of recording worship yet in any form. We had just done an overhaul of the sound system. And we had gone from 2 services to 1 service. And now with the pandemic, we decided, and I say we because we're congregationally based, so it's definitely a decision that my church council took on behalf of the whole congregation, and had to inform the whole congregation step by step. We decided really early on, from early March, to close the facilities, because we also host 2 other congregations and a number of community organizations. But we did go live, and I'm still going live through Facebook from my living room. So that's similar for me, Shannon. My mom usually lives closer to Los Angeles, but she lives with my sister, who's an essential employee and is in more contact with the public than I am. So I brought her here really early on in early March too. And I mention her because she's become my liturgist. Every week she helps off camera first to do the liturgy with me, but for the reading of scripture, I put her on camera right next to me. And I tease her, I tell her she's become a video sensation because people really enjoy her participation. And so, yeah, we've had to learn, like all the pastors all over the world, right? Overnight, how to make this work. I too live in the church parsonage, and I'm grateful for this beautiful home. And I live stream from my living room. The other thing that really helped is we had just hired a new website. We call him a webmaster, and he's helped put everything on our website. And then we finally just pre-recorded our first service, but normally we go live right on time, and you know, it's very fresh, so to speak.
Right.
But we're just learning now how to do the pre-recorded pieces ahead of time.
I'm sure there's been a lot of glitches, and things happen and technology happens, and I imagine there's some bloopers out there, but it's been a learning curve. But have you noticed, and anyone can answer this, how this has reached your congregation? Have you noticed maybe more viewers, or have you reached people in different states, or how are you experiencing the number of people that are worshiping with you online?
I saw nods of affirmation from my 2 colleagues when you asked about increase. It is very interesting, the number of folks who are tuning in live as well as watching it afterwards exceeds what our regular Sunday attendance would have been with 4 services. So it's and more people went to every single Holy Week service that we had. No one skipped from Palm Sunday to Easter this year. And there's a real, what I sense is a real hunger for both remembering God's larger story to our lives, as well as the desire to be connected in community. But yeah, I'm getting emails from all over the world from folks who are responding to what they've discovered in worship at Fourth. So it's pretty profound to me.
That is profound. I always say, and I think the one thing that we've learned from this is that the church is not the building. And we have seen there's such a need for help, not emotionally, physically, spiritually. During these times, many people are out of work. So what are your churches doing for services and reaching people beyond your building during this pandemic?
So in a way, the pandemic has helped us. I'm definitely counting the hidden blessings that have come out of this time. I don't like to pretend that there haven't been loss, of many different kinds. But I am trying to lift up the good things that have happened. And so one of the good things is I mentioned that we host 2 other congregations in our facility. And, we were kind of like polite roommates before, I'll say. but now there's been more collaboration, and we're about to start a feeding program on our property for the community. Before that, two of us, one of those clergy and myself, we had begun to volunteer with some of our people and ourselves at our local food bank. And then also my church has a corporation that's connected to my church, and it's called CCDC, Community Congregational Development Corporation. And we've been able to financially help organizations, especially those that are focused on helping seniors in our community in a variety of ways, through food, through sheltering. We just bought a first mobile shower for all of South Bay for unsheltered people, thousands of masks, and so those kind of things. And we also have a tower that we had built many years ago next door, and it's for low-income seniors, and so they get regularly fed through us as well.
That's great. What about in Chicago? What are some of the needs that the church has been able to provide services for?
Well, certainly different members are involved in making masks. We have a regular Saturday feeding program called Hope's Table Chicago. After the first couple of weeks, we were trying to keep members safe as well. But after a while, folks got itchy, and so we found a way to deliver food in such a way that we can provide for our guests, as well as keep our persons protected as well. And that still happens every week.
That's great. What about Fourth Presbyterian?
Yeah, so we have a social service center that's a part of, we have a nonprofit, Chicago Lights. And so our EDSSC social service agency, even though our building is closed, we're still doing emergency curbside service, handing out emergency essentials, food pantry boxes, clothing, hygiene items, etc. People have to wait. They're 6 feet apart. We have designated times, and then we have staff who are volunteering to do that with all the personal protective equipment that they have. And so go to the door, see what someone needs, go back in. We've transformed what used to be part of the gathering space in our near the reception desk into the food pantry and clothing pantry, basically. So so they can just go instead of having to go down to the social service center. And then we have meals to go, bag lunches 4 days a week, as well as a hot meal on Sunday evenings that we serve to go. And so people can grab it and head on their way. But we decided that those things were really essential to who we are, to keep doing that to the best of our abilities in the safest way possible, because there are so many people who are very vulnerable right now and who rely on us normally to be a literal sanctuary. But now at least we can still do something.
Definitely. I'm loving all the creative ways that churches are reaching out to people in need. It's just been really, really uplifting to see. But one of the communities that has been hit the hardest is the African American and Latino communities, especially in Chicago. The death toll for those communities is extremely high. Myron, can you talk a little bit about the inequities? I know there's so many underlying reasons, but why is this happening?
Well, I think, in fact, I was at a symposium there at Fourth Presbyterian about a year ago, and we talked about how different zip codes, the life expectancy is different. And so there are issues with healthcare in neighborhoods that make persons more vulnerable. The other reality is that many persons are engaged in work where they are involved in essential services. And so they are apt to be exposed. They're utilizing public transportation to get back and forth to work. And so that's a problem and a challenge.
Definitely. Reverend Aguilar, how is it in California?
The largest group that's been hit hard are Latinos in California. most likely because there are more Latinos here than other groups. And so I would say that the answer is similar to Reverend McCoy's, in that they're the first responders in many ways, and they many of them already lacked enough health services and or health insurance, also because of the recent discrimination against undocumented people. Those that are undocumented already were resistant to get health services and many other services that weren't allowed for them to be able to have to begin with. And then the pandemic just made it everything harder for them. I mentioned that we're 7 miles north of Tijuana, so that has created a whole other dimension that's unique, I think, to the country, because the numbers there are really high. And those folks that are essential employees are still allowed to come back and forth through the border. And so the numbers here in Chula Vista is higher than in other areas of California.
Some of the churches and congregations, are saying that, church is essential and they want to go back to worshiping. They want to be back in the building. I think with the United Methodist Church, the bishop in the Northern Illinois Conference has said we need to remain vigilant and remain closed at this time until it is safe to do so and return in a safe manner. So how are you talking to your congregations that are really wanting to get back into worship and fellowship?
Most persons with some degree of sensitivity to what's happening in our society recognize that going back is easier said than done. Mm-hmm. And I think even if churches were open, many more persons would take their time about returning back to church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've had the discussion on a regular basis that the church building is closed, but the church is still happening. And luckily, at least, Myron, I don't know if you feel the same way, but whether or not you open church in Chicago is not a political statement yet, like it is in some other states, because of the way our governor and our mayor have handled the crisis. But we've already made the decision that we're doing no on-site programming through the summer, and we'll continue to live stream worship when we can. A few of us will go back to the sanctuary and do it from there instead of from my living room. But we're not there's nowhere near getting back to business as usual, whatever that means. And so it feels like a large mountain to climb before we're back ready for that, because we want to keep everyone's safety and well-being first and forefront. I mean, that's the most important thing.
Right. Not only congregations, but your staff.
Yeah. And for people we have contact with. Sorry,
yeah,
Mike.
we certainly don't want to be spreading it in society as well.
No.
And for many of our congregations, they are the vulnerable, the elderly, and those with compromised immune systems. So we have to be extra cautious. How is it in California with your guidelines, Reverend Aguilar?
So there has been a lot of political pressure out here, I would say. And interestingly enough, just yesterday, the governor of California has said that churches can open up. And I do appreciate that they prepared a 12-page guidelines for us. And so just yesterday, I went through the guidelines, and then I tried to really focus on what it means for our individual church and our facilities. And then I drew up an additional, what I'm going to call procedures and guidelines. And then because we're a congregational church, I have to show it to my moderator, he'll show it to church council, et cetera, et cetera. My conference minister, so it would be equivalent for United Methodist, probably like a bishop. We don't have bishops in the United Church of Christ, but if we did, he would be it. He had just sent an important letter to our churches just last week saying that, we shouldn't rush to open up. But to tell you the truth, now that the governor has said it's okay for us to open, and then our president has said, demanded that we open, I do feel more pressure. However, I'm not going to take on any unnecessary risks. It's not worth it. I've kind of joked, but kind of not, that I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I found out that someone got sick and or died and they traced it back to our worship space. Literally I would have to rethink my calling. Probably. It would be that detrimental to me personally, and obviously to those families and my congregation. So it's not worth the risk. I'm hoping that my church council will agree with what the moderator and I have just talked about last night, which is we're going to propose to wait 21 days because the governor of California has said that they're going to look at the next 21 days as a time to test it out. And I'm thinking other churches could test it out. I'm not willing to test it out with my people. You know, they're not going to be guinea pigs.
Right.
Let's see what happens with other people. Then lastly, the other thing that just happened this weekend is our beaches were so crowded. And so I want to see, unfortunately, I need to see what happens in the next 2 weeks. How many more people are going to get infected? And so I'm just now putting those guidelines in place. But as far as actually having in-person worship, I'm probably going to wait those 21 days. But this is definitely in flux.
Are the state guidelines how many can gather? Are they limiting that, like 250, or is it?
They said 100 people maximum, or 25% of your usual capacity. To me, that part's a little confusing, because 25% for a mega church is a lot more than 100 people. But I think it said whichever's less. So my worship population is not large. It's about 100 to 125 in person. But now that we've been recording, doing it live, I've had more than 400 viewers. You know, for us, that's a lot. So the other thing is I'm going to now record whenever we do live in-person worship, I should say. I will have to continue recording, which I wasn't doing before, from the sanctuary, because there'll be a number of older people that already told me they're not going to rush to come back to in-person worship, and I don't blame them.
Yeah, that was one question I was going to ask. What have we learned through this pandemic going online, and will you continue some of those offerings into the future?
Yeah, I think for us, then an interesting thing is how, even when we go back to a sanctuary and we have a congregation at some point, at some time, those of us who are leading worship are going to have to not just think of the people who are live streaming it as sort of watching us worship, that they need to be as much a part of the experience as those in the sanctuary. So that's going to require, I think, a change of mindset for those of us who are in worship leadership. We're used to just sort of focusing on the people gathered who are physically present. And through this, we've been forced to think about the virtual congregation. And I don't think we can lose that as we move forward. As well as my meetings have way many people there who are there on time now that we're Zooming it than in person. We have more people at prayer meetings. We have more people in Bible studies. So I think all of that, we need to invest a little bit more in technology, but all of that is going to continue. I hope. I don't want to lose that energy and momentum.
Definitely. So there's been obviously some other impacts though on the congregations financially, right? I mean, how are you dealing with the online giving and making sure that people are still investing in our ministries?
Interestingly enough, we've being able to swipe and ACH giving, we've pushed very hard. And so interestingly enough, the first 4 months, we're running right where we need to be, which is amazing. And we're encouraging folks. Part of it, I think, is with what we're offering in terms of our services. And I said, I do it several ways. I can see all of my folks as they're on. And my folks who aren't acquainted with technology or see it as a problem, they can call in and be a part of the service. And so we're seeking to stay connected, as well as being able to penetrate places where we had not thought of before. The other thing is that I think people are more connected, and they see a sense of the church being more important to them. Sports has been eliminated, and so we're turning toward each other. And so they recognize that even for my Saturday service, more people than ever, they don't have a ball game to watch. So we're the only game in town, so they joined with us. So they want to support it.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, the one other question I was going to ask is, what are some of the signs of hope that you've seen during this crisis?
One of the first things that we began is we created what we call a care team, and where we had pretty much handpicked some people we thought would have the gift to do this, but they call all of our members every week. And you know, before, I think some church members were comfortable with their friends and their family members, but not necessarily going out of their comfort zone, so to speak. But now we have these people calling each other, writing to each other, checking in on each other. So we had that calling in a ministry put together right away, and that's worked for our benefit. And then we also, a part of that is what we call runners. So especially at the beginning, we had people who couldn't, you know, were already quarantined, and they couldn't leave their home, and they needed medication and toilet paper and that kind of thing, especially our seniors. And so we had people running out literally to go get those emergency supplies for them. So that worked. And so there's just been a new, I would say, vitality to our congregation in terms of care and lay people reaching out to lay people, and not being so dependent on the church staff to do it all. So I think that they're learning how to be modern day disciples, and really serving God in ways that are personal to them.
That's fantastic. Myron Kershner, how have you seen some signs of hope in your congregation?
Yeah, I mean, very similar in lots of ways as to what's going on in California. We have, my congregation is a large one, and so we have over about 700 adults who are 70 and over. And so clergy and deacons and a group of volunteer callers have been calling everyone. So we're trying to check on every one of our folks who are 70 or over. And that kind of intentional connection is pretty critical. And I think it just communicates that we care, because we do. So, I mean, that kind of, and then people are asking, how can I get involved in this calling ministry? Very similar to what Liz was talking about. So that's exciting to me. Our children's chapel meets still via Zoom. And so the little kids, I'm always getting pictures of little kids that I baptized singing in front of a laptop or a TV watching, participating in worship. So that's another, it's engaging whole families, similar to what Myron was saying. I mean, we are now a place where families come very intentionally in ways that maybe they weren't being as intentional about before because of all the other things in their lives. And so that's another sign of hope, as is people's generosity.
Definitely. Reverend McCoy, what signs of hope have you seen?
Well, I think one sign of hope is, Shannon indicated it before, I think it has pushed since where folks come from all over, it has pushed us into technology where we needed to have been, but we've been pushed there. And I think there's a comfort level in it that we had not had before, that persons will at least try. And as Liz suggested, I think we're all learning how to be, so we're not in the building, but we are really being church.
And we heard the president say last week that churches are essential. Well, we've always known that, right? How would you respond to that?
Churches are essential in terms of the caring for people, caring for society. But in terms of just being in a building, I don't think so.
Right. Yeah. Yes. I have lots of responses to that. But yes, I think Reverend McCoy summed it up well.
The church will definitely look different after this pandemic. None of us expected or even imagined this would ever have happened. But how do you expect your church to look a little differently when this is over?
We won't have as many people worshiping together. Also, we won't have a choir probably because of, there's been so many studies now done, and we won't be willing to take that risk. That's going to be very sad, I think, for us. So the music ministry is going to look differently. Just last night we were creatively trying to think, well, even for those who are singing, should we put them behind plexiglass, that kind of thing. Where I will be preaching will probably be, already I preach from a pulpit that's pretty far away from the congregation, but now we'll rope off the first pews. We'll definitely have people sitting in every other pew, and we'll probably have to mark off where they could sit. I don't want them to feel a sense like they're going to be policed. And I think that's going to be the challenge, is how do we continue to have it feel and truly seem like a place of welcome and relaxation and come as you are, that kind of thing. But now I know we're going to have to be vigilant and make sure everyone has masks. We won't have coffee hour afterwards. That's a big deal for us. Where we have in-person meetings, and it won't be more than 10 people. So yeah, it is going to look a lot different, and a part of it, I'm already cringing about it. Not because I fear change, but because some of what we will lose it's just going to be a big loss. And we won't know when we could return to what we had before. And we just miss each other. We miss being together, touching, hugging. Those are important things. And I won't be able to hug my parishioners. And it'll be, probably 3 months before I see them. And by then, between 3 and 4 months. And I know my first reaction will be to go hug so-and-so, and I won't be able to do that. So it will look very different.
And no more handshakes. Communion's probably going to look a lot different. Our ushers, offer plates, so many different things to think of.
Hymnals, Bibles, bulletins, yeah.
Yeah, and even the other losses that we've had, funerals look different, weddings and baptisms have all had to be put on hold. So there is a lot of loss, and people do miss the fellowship and being with each other. I know when I go on to my online church services in the chat, that's everyone's just keeps saying, I miss you, I miss you, I miss you. Everyone just misses each other and being in fellowship. So that is probably one of the biggest losses, I agree. So anything else you want to add about this topic and how your churches are facing this challenge during this very difficult time?
We're learning resilience. And I think we're figuring out very quickly what is essential to who we are. And maybe rethinking priorities as we consider how to phase some things back in, maybe. So there's a lot more resilience, I think, in our congregations than maybe we give them credit for. And they really do want to love God and love neighbor and take that seriously. And so we're just having to learn how to love neighbor differently. And it certainly presents some definite loss, but I do think there's also some opportunity that we don't even know yet.
One thing that is missing right now is with the stay-at-home ban still being in place, different congregations getting together, how we do social justice, how we grapple with common issues. I look forward to that returning, and so that is a challenge in itself. There is much, like we need to be involved in the issue of can people vote? and be safe. In the state of Illinois, we need to be grappling with the issue of fair tax instead of us proliferating marijuana dispensaries and gambling as a solution for us. So there is a need for us to get together to talk about the collective will and power of the churches coming together.
Definitely. Yes, thank you so much. Reverend Aguilar, did you have any last thoughts? Or?
Just that, like Shannon was saying, that I really appreciate how much my congregation has been able to step forward with technology, with giving, with serving, trusting one another, trusting my leadership. I'm still new here, but I just really appreciate how much they've been able to come along this ride with one another and with myself.
And the church is still the church, right? We are
Amen.
the church.
Amen.
Amen. It's been really wonderful talking to you as colleagues and leaders in Chicago, and you make me miss Chicago, my hometown.
Come on back home.
If it wasn't for the weather, I'd
Bring
be
the sunshine with you, please.
Exactly. But thank you so much, everyone. This has been good for me too, just personally.
I
Thank
think
you.
it's really important. Yeah, I think it's really important for all of us who are in leadership and ministry to remember that we're all trying to figure it out, and we don't have to figure it out on our own. It's really easy to do stay at home as isolation. And so I appreciate you gathering us in this way.
Thank you, Reverend McCoy, Reverend Kershner, and Reverend Aguilera for joining us. I'm Anne Marie Gerhardt for the Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries. Keep the faith.